everyone, my name is Brianna Beehler and I am a PhD candidate here at USC in English Literature. I actually work on the 19th century novel and Dickens in particular, so I'm really excited to be talking about Barnaby Reg with all of you today. But Barnaby Reg is actually one of my original favorite Dickens novels, so I am really excited and grateful for this opportunity, and thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to get into this. All right, so I will be discussing chapters 70 through 74, which is not a very long section, but it is a really intense one. A lot happens. Things that characters had delayed and thought, oh, this will never happen. It finally comes up on them. People who have been suffering, not knowing what's going on, they finally figure out what's going on. So it's really important. There's a lot of transition. A lot of this is signaled, I think, by the fact that we open chapter 70 with Mr. Dennis going to visit Dolly, Emma Haredale, and Miss Miggs, where they are imprisoned. And it ends in chapter 74, in which Mr. Dennis finds himself imprisoned, which he did not expect with Hugh at Newgate. Somehow he didn't see that coming. Although we begin and end with Dennis, we see a really big shift in who is being held prisoner and who's doing the imprisoning. Right? There's this shuffling of characters and power dynamics after the riots are finally over, and those who thought they held power suddenly find that they no longer have that position anymore. Also, Dickens covers a lot of ground between these two scenes with the hangman. He zooms in and out. We get these really intimate portraits inside these confined areas, confined spaces. We're with, Dolly and Emma and Miss Miggs, and then we're with the Rudges, and then we're with Dennis and Hugh, but we have access to these rooms, but then also we suddenly zoom out sometimes, and we suddenly have this God's eye view, looking down on the whole city and all of the citizens, coping with all of the ruin that has happened after these riots and all of the changes that will also come with this damage and this unsettling of the power structures that were there. There are also a couple other ways that Dickens plays with perspective and knowledge and what we know or want to know but can't know in this section. The other technique that we see a lot of is a delayed reveal, right? Where we're given a little bit about information, maybe a hint about someone or something that's about to happen. For instance, I'm thinking about the moaning that we hear coming from the other room, but only later, actually quite a bit later, do we realize that that moaning or the suggestion of a wounded person was actually our old friend Simon Tappertit, who's been brought to rest and to heal after being severely injured in the riots. Within this revelation of hearing the moaning to finding out that it's Simon, there's another delayed reveal, right, where a man shows up to rescue Emma. We don't know who he is, but only after the real rescuers show up to save the women and knock him down, we realize, oh, this is Gashford, right? And then they leave, and that's when we see Simon is the man who was wounded. So there's a lot of things are withheld within that sequence of events. Of course, there are also some things that are revealed that we do not necessarily need to be explicitly told. For instance, Dolly does not need to tell us that she's in love with Joe for us to realize that she is. How do we know this? When she sees Joe and she sees that he has lost his arm in war, she cries, not because she was upset about what happened to her in the house or everything that's happening now with the rescue and all of these pent-up emotions. She cries because she looks at his arm, and what she tells us is, the nurse who cared for him couldn't have possibly done as good of a job as I would have done, right? And then she doesn't say this, but of course the difference between that nurse and her is that she loves him, right? That's what would make all the difference in the type of care that she would provide. And Joe's loss from the war actually becomes really telling in a couple other ways as well, particularly with how his father responds, right? And that really sort of long and prolonged realization where he's looking at his son and he can't really speak or say what's different. And when he finally does, it's we've waited so long that it's almost funny, right? It's yes, of course, this physical presence that you finally acknowledge suddenly masks this kind of painful reunion between father and son in something humorous, right? And in this way, we see Dickens as using humor to both direct our attention to something, right? Mr. Willett is looking directly at Joe and directly at his absent arm, but also using humor to make us look away a little bit and think about Mr. Willett and his response to it rather than Joe and the suffering and pain that he endured in fighting and losing his arm in the battle. So we see Dickens covering up some horrible, unimaginable, and ultimately unspeakable things like the violence of war by using some humorous devices. Specifically, I'm thinking about Miss Miggs, who we saw earlier, and the way that her ridiculousness covers up or maybe layers the fact that she helps Mr. Dennis, right, the executioner, plan the abduction of the two young women who she is imprisoned with and that she knows and has cared for a long time, and to also sympathize with her and who they assume is on their side. But she's willing to trade that and to look over it, which is so, I think heartbreakingly cruel. But when we read that scene, we might think, oh, Miggs is frustrating, or she is annoying. But we don't necessarily think, oh, she is so deeply unsympathetic with the other women who are imprisoned, because we're so focused on her humorous devices and on how Dickens layers her reaction by drawing upon these sort of comical ways of describing her and her comical actions. So even as she's talking about it, we find that she's verbalizing exactly what she's doing. We find our attention focused more on her than on these terrible things that might happen to these young women, or that will happen to them if nobody intervenes. That was what I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope that it is productive and generative for all of you, and I'm really excited to know where your conversation goes. Enjoy the rest of the book. Thank you.